Welcome to Back on the Stack, a cEDH channel. Do you want to look fresh, all while showing your love for the cEDH community? Then check out our Bonfire site to shop for some of our logoed threads. Another way to directly support our content is to sign up for Patreon. Subscribers to our Grand Slam tier will receive a playmat for absolutely free. Now, let's get right into it and see what decks are being piloted tonight. Tonight I'm piloting Bajorna and Wernog. This partner pair is sometimes called Clue Farm, and it's about 14 cards off of my Blue Farm list. But the advantage here is that on top of the Breach Lines and Thoracle wins, this deck can also win by looping Dockside with either Cloudstone Curio or Chthonian Nightmare. Then you can use the Infinite Treasures to start looping Wernog, which allows you to draw your deck and assemble a win. I mulled to 6 with this hand and wanted to have some interaction right away, just in case a certain turbo deck started to pop off.
Hello, this is Brian Coval, aka BoshnRoll. You can find me on YouTube at BoshnRoll for daily Eternal Magic the Gathering videos. Tonight I'm playing Rograk Silas, the Turbo Grixis combo deck. Turbo is not an archetype in this format that I'm super familiar with. I've played a bunch of other stuff and just trying to round out my profile by getting some reps on a deck like this one. The hand I kept in game 1 had a ton of mana, and if I find any tutor or engine piece off of my draw step plus mild selection that my hand offers, I am ready to go in style with protection.
Hey everybody, it's Eli, and tonight I'm piloting Najeela the Blade Blossom. This is a 5-color good stuff deck that seeks to win through a variety of ways, such as Underworld Breach, Thassa's Oracle, Ad Nauseam, and some creature combos with Derevi. I had to mull down to 4 here, but I'm pretty happy with it. Turn 1 Najeela and turn 1 Esper Sentinel. See what we can do with this.
Howdy, my name is Levi, and today I'm playing the 15th Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith. This is a Jeskai pile that aims to win with Underworld Breach. I aim to abuse the ETB and attack trigger of the 15th Doctor to fill my graveyard so I can get some early Breach wins. This opening hand, I kept it because it is a turn 2 Rhystic Study. And if that doesn't work, I have a turn 3 One Ring, if we make it there.
With introductions out of the way, J-Rock will kick us off. He draws and plays Command Tower. He passes. Brian draws and plays Otawara, Soaring City as land for turn. He casts Soul Ring. He casts Talisman of Dominance. He casts his commander, Rograk. He passes. Eli draws and plays Arid Mesa. He casts Jeweled Lotus. He sacrifices J-Lo to cast his commander, Najeela the Blade Blossom. He pays a life, sacrifices his Arid Mesa, and fetches up Savannah to the battlefield. He casts Esper Sentinel. He passes. Levi draws and plays Sea of Clouds for turn. He passes. J-Rock draws and plays Flooded Strand for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Volcanic Island to the battlefield. He casts his commander, Bajorna, Nightfall Alchemist. He passes. Brian draws and plays Undercity Sewers as land for turn. It ETBs and he surveils Underworld Breach into his graveyard. He passes. Eli draws and plays Taiga for turn. He casts Delighted Halfling. He moves to combat and swings both Najeela and Esper at Brian. Najeela triggers on attack and he creates a 1/1 White Warrior token tapped and attacking Brian as well. He takes the damage. Eli moves through phases and in his end step, Levi casts Enlightened Tutor. Esper triggers and Eli draws. E-Tutor resolves and Levi tutors Mana Crypt to the top of his library. The turn then moves to Levi. Levi draws and plays Flooded Strand as land for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Volcanic Island to the battlefield. He casts Mana Crypt. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Levi casts Rhystic Study. In response, Brian casts Swan Song, targeting the Rhystic Study. Esper triggers and he pays. In response, Levi casts Flusterstorm, with all 4 copies targeting Swan Song. Still in response, J-Rock casts Force of Negation for its alternate casting cost, exiling Chain of Vapor, targeting Rhystic Study. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Force then resolves, countering and exiling Rhystic Study. Flusterstorm counters Swan Song, and Levi passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays Badlands for turn. He casts Gamble. Esper triggers and he pays. Gamble resolves and J-Rock tutors a card to his hand and randomly discards Dark Ritual. He passes the turn. Brian draws and plays Gemstone Caverns for turn. He casts his other commander, Silas Wren. He passes. Eli draws and casts Eladamri's Call. It resolves and he tutors Samut to hand. He casts Lotus Petal. He casts Rite of Flame. It resolves and he adds 2 red to his mana pool. He casts Samut. He moves to combat and swings Najeela, Samut, and his warrior token all at Levi. Najeela triggers on attack, and he creates 3 more 1/1 warrior tokens tapped and attacking Levi. Levi takes the damage. Samut triggers, and Eli draws 4 cards. In his second main phase, he plays Ancient Tomb as land for turn. He moves through phases and passes. In his upkeep, Levi loses his Crypt Roll. He draws and immediately casts the One Ring. Esper triggers and Eli draws. Levi taps the One Ring, adding a birding counter and drawing a card. He plays Steam Vents as land for turn, shocking it in. He casts Sensei's Divining Top. He passes. J-Rock draws and simply passes. Brian draws and also passes. Eli draws and plays City of Brass for turn. He moves to combat and swings Najeela and Samut at Levi and his 4 warrior tokens at J-Rock. Najeela triggers and he creates 6 more warrior tokens tapped and attacking J-Rock. J-Rock blocks one of the newly created warrior tokens and takes 9 damage. Levi has 1 ring protection and takes no damage. Samut then triggers and Eli draws 5 cards. In his second main phase, Eli casts Mystic Remora. He casts Soul Ring. He moves through phases, discarding a hand size, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Levi loses his Crypt Roll. He also takes 1 damage from the One Ring. He draws and immediately taps the One Ring to draw 2 more cards. He moves to his end step, and in response, J-Rock casts Tainted Pact. Esper and Fish both trigger, he pays for Esper and Eli draws for Fish. J-Rock then exiles all but the bottom 2 cards of his library, putting Mana Vault into hand. The turn moves to J-Rock. J-Rock draws and plays Reflecting Pool for turn. He casts Thassa's Oracle. In response, Eli casts Force of Will for its alternative casting cost, exiling Polywog Prodigy. Unfortunately for J-Rock, he does not have a response. Thassa's is countered, and J-Rock passes the turn. Brian draws and plays Underground Sea. He passes. In his upkeep, Eli pays for Fish. He draws and casts Dark Ritual. It resolves and he adds 3 black to his mana pool. He casts Grim Hireling. In response, Levi casts Force of Will for its alternative casting cost, exiling Pact of Negation. Esper and Fish both trigger, Levi pays for Esper, and Eli draws through Fish. He moves to combat and swings Najeela, Samut, and 9 warrior tokens, all at Levi. Najeela triggers and he creates 11 more tokens tapped and attacking Levi. In response, Levi knows he has to throw up a Hail Mary in an attempt to survive. So, he taps his top, drawing a card and putting top on the top of his library. He casts Intuition, targeting J-Rock. Fish triggers and Eli draws. It resolves and he tells the table that after searching his deck, he does not see an answer. So, he picks 3 random cards and J-Rock gives him Lion's Eye Diamond. Then, the attacks happen and Levi is eliminated. Samut triggers 11 times and Eli draws 11 cards. In his second main phase, he plays Scalding Tarn. He pays a life, sacks it, fetches up Underground Sea to the battlefield. He casts Warren Soul Trader. He activates Soul Trader twice, paying 2 life, sacrificing 2 warrior tokens, and creating 2 treasures. He uses them both right away to cast Grand Abolisher. In response, Brian casts Mindbreak Trap. Esper and Fish both trigger, and Brian pays for it all. In response, Eli activates Warren Soul Trader 2 more times, creating 2 more treasures, and uses them to hard cast Force of Negation. It resolves, countering Mindbreak Trap, and Grand Abolisher resolves. He activates Warren Soul Trader 4 more times, creating 4 more treasures. He casts Thassa's Oracle. With her ETB on the stack, he casts Demonic Consultation, naming Elvish Impersonator. He exiles his entire library, Thassa's ETB happens, and with his devotion to blue being greater than the number of cards left in his library, Eli wins the game. It's not every day that you get to casually play cEDH with Brian Coval, so of course we asked him to stick around for one more. We re-randomized seed order, shuffled up, and tried again.
What's better than a turn 1 fish? A turn 1 fish with a lot of mana to pay for it.
For Game 2, I learned from my mistake from Game 1, and I kept a hand that had turn 1 Mystic Remora with a Tutor and Demonic Consultation left over. That sounds way more Rogsai than what I did in the first game.
For Game 2, I was very happy to see this hand. I should be able to cast a turn 1 Demonic Tutor to grab a Cloudstone Curio, then go into turn 2 with a Dockside and a possible win attempt on the stack if the treasure count is high enough.
For Game 2, I'm in 4th seat. Also had to mull down to 4, certainly not as good as Game 1, but I can still get a turn 1 Najeela out, maybe see if I can draw into any sort of creature tutor to get Samut or Esper Sentinel. I have a Chatterfang as backup for a combo. Certainly not excited by this hand, but I just don't want to mull lower than this.
With opening hands decided, Levi will kick us off. He draws and plays City of Traders for turn. He casts Arcane Signet. He casts Mystic Remora. It resolves and the turn moves to Brian. Brian draws and plays Badlands for turn. He casts Lotus Petal. Fish triggers and Levi draws. He casts his own Mystic Remora. Fish triggers and Levi draws. He casts his commander, Rograk. He casts a Mana Crypt. Fish triggers and Levi draws. He casts Imperial Seal. Fish triggers and Levi draws. It resolves and he tutors a card to the top of his library, loses 2 life, and passes the turn. J-Rock draws and plays Underground Sea. He casts Mana Crypt. Both fishes trigger and both Levi and Brian draw. He casts Demonic Tutor. Both fishes trigger and both draw. He tutors a card to hand and passes the turn. Eli draws and plays Flooded Strand for turn. He casts Mana Crypt. Both fishes trigger and both draw. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand to add 1 red mana. He casts his commander, Najeela. He passes. In his upkeep, Levi pays for fish. He draws and taps City of Traders to float 2 colorless mana. He plays Wooded Foothills for turn. City of Traders triggers and he sacrifices it. He pays a life, sacrifices Wooded Foothills, and fetches up Sacred Foundry to the battlefield, shocking it in. He casts his commander, Sarah Jane Smith. He casts Mox Amber. Fish triggers and Brian draws. Sarah Jane triggers and Levi creates a clue token. He casts Talisman of Conviction. Fish triggers and Brian draws. Levi moves through phases, discarding to hand size, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Brian loses his Crypt Roll. Also in upkeep, he casts Red Elemental Blast, targeting Levi's Mystic Remora. Fish triggers and Levi draws. In response, Levi casts Fierce Guardianship. Fish triggers and Brian draws. Then Fierce counters Red Blast. Still in upkeep, Brian pays for fish. He draws and plays Steam Vents, shocking it in. He passes. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt Roll. He draws and plays Scalding Tarn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Plateau to the battlefield. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It ETBs and he creates 8 treasure tokens. He casts Cloudstone Curio. Both fishes trigger and both Levi and Brian draw. In response, Levi casts Force of Negation for its alternate casting cost, exiling Phyrexia Metamorph. Fish triggers and Brian draws. In response, J-Rock casts Pact of Negation, targeting the Force. Both fishes trigger and Levi and Brian both draw. In response, Levi casts his own Red Elemental Blast, targeting the Pact of Negation. Fish triggers and Brian draws. REB then counters Pact, and Force of Negation counters and exiles Cloudstone Curio. When attempt stopped, J-Rock casts his commander, Bajorna, Nightfall Alchemist. He casts Grim Tutor. Both fishes trigger and both draw. It resolves and J-Rock tutors a card to hand, loses 3 life, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Eli wins his Crypt Roll. He draws for turn. He pays a life, sacks his Flooded Strand, and fetches up Underground Sea to the battlefield. He casts Warren Soul Trader. He moves to combat and swings Najeela at Brian. Najeela triggers and he creates a 1/1 warrior token, tapped and attacking Brian as well. Brian takes 4 damage. Eli then moves through phases and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Levi casts Enlightened Tutor. Fish triggers and Brian draws. It resolves and Levi tutors Underworld Breach to the top of his library. Still in upkeep, he sacrifices Mystic Remora. He draws and plays Polluted Delta for turn. He pays a life, sacks it, and fetches up Tundra to the battlefield. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos. It ETBs and he tutors Dragon's Rage Channeler to hand. He casts Darcy. He casts Mox Opal. Fish, Sarah Jane, and Darcy all trigger. Brian draws, Levi creates a clue token, and he surveils 1, leaving it on top. He moves through phases and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Brian loses his Crypt Roll. Also in upkeep, he sacrifices his Mystic Remora. He draws and immediately casts Jataxian Probe, paying 2 life and targeting Levi. Levi shows him his hand, and Brian draws a card. He casts Bergi, God of Storytelling. He plays Gemstone Caverns. He casts Talisman of Indulgence. Bergi triggers and he adds 1 red mana to his mana pool. He casts Underworld Breach. Bergi triggers and he adds a red. He casts Lotus Petal from his graveyard. Bergi triggers and he makes a red. He casts Jeska's Will, choosing both modes and targeting Levi. Bergi triggers and he adds a red. Jeska's Will resolves and he adds 4 more red mana to his pool and exiles the top 3 cards from his library, which are Volcanic Island, Phyrexian Tower, and Grim Monolith. He casts Grim Monolith. Bergi triggers and he adds a red. Hitting some not-so-great Jeska's Will flips, Brian has to move through phases, discards to hand size, and passes the turn. In his upkeep, J-Rock loses his Crypt Roll. He draws and plays Godless Shrine, shocking it in. He moves through phases and passes the turn. In his upkeep, Eli wins his Crypt Roll. He draws and, still missing a land drop, decides to activate Warren Soul Trader, paying a life, sacrificing his warrior token, and creating a treasure token. He casts Chatterfang, Squirrel General. He moves to combat, and in response, Levi casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Najeela. In response, Eli sacrifices it to warn Soul Trader, paying a life and creating a treasure token. Chatterfang triggers and he creates a squirrel token. He moves through phases, but the group knows that Levi has Underworld Breach in hand with a Ranger Captain to protect his win. So, they all convince Eli to use the Chatterfang Soul Trader loop to create enough squirrels to activate Chatterfang to kill the Ranger Captain. Every time Eli pays a life and sacks a squirrel to warn Soul Trader, he creates a treasure token, which triggers Chatterfang to create another squirrel token. He activates the loop 5 times, creating 5 treasures, losing 5 life. He casts his commander again. He sacrifices Najeela right away to Soul Trader, getting another treasure token, and now going up to 2 squirrel tokens. He does this same loop 7 more times and casts Najeela for the 3rd time. He sacks Najeela to now have a total of 3 squirrel tokens. He loops the squirrel tokens 10 more times, going down to 15 life and creating 10 more treasures. He recasts Najeela a 4th time. He then activates Chatterfang, paying a black and sacrificing all 3 squirrels to give Ranger Captain neg 3 until end of turn. In response, Levi activates Ranger Captain by sacrificing it. With Ranger now off the battlefield, the turn moves to Levi. Levi draws and plays Hallowed Fountain for turn, shocking it in. He casts Underworld Breach. Darcy triggers and he surveils Cyclonic Rift to the grave. Unbelievably, Underworld Breach resolves. Levi casts Transmute Artifact. Darcy triggers and he surveils Esper Sentinel to the graveyard. Transmute resolves and he sacrifices Arcane Signet. He tutors Lion's Eye Diamond to the battlefield. He sacrifices LED, adding 3 blue to his mana pool and discarding his hand, which is an Intuition. He casts Intuition. With the writing on the wall and each opponent announcing that they are F6, they all decide to concede, and Levi wins the game. The entire team at Back on the Stack wants to thank Brian Coval for taking some time to play cEDH with us. He was a fun guy to hang out with for the evening, and his knowledge of Magic is extremely vast. Congrats to both Eli and Levi for getting the wins. Feel free to check out our deck links listed below, and we will see you back on the stack.
To be honest, Brian scared me. He had a lot of mana. I didn't know that he didn't have any gas at all in his hand.
Yeah, I probably should have mulliganed. I'm coming off of a lot of experience with Timnacrom and just learning Rogsai, and my hand was 4 mana on turn 1 with Dockside and 2 pieces of 1 mana interaction still back up. And Undercity Sewers to look a little bit, but without an engine card, I think I'm supposed to ship that.
Yeah, that's TNK mindset.
Yep, for sure. I would have won out of that game with different commanders. Yeah. Take that to the bank.